What happens when a man who has everything tries to destroy a woman who has nothing in the glittering heart of New York City inside a restaurant where a single meal costs more than a month's rent? Billionaire titan Gavin Creed is about to have his perfect world shattered. He unleashed a torrent of rage on a humble waitress over a simple mistake, intending to publicly humiliate her to crush her spirit. But he never expected her response. He never expected a ghost from a past he had buried under billions of dollars to reappear. She would say just one sentence, a quiet, simple question that would detonate like a bomb, silencing the entire room and forcing a powerful man to his knees. This isn't a fairy tale. This is a story about how the deepest secrets never stay buried. The air in Ethelgard was not merely conditioned, it was curated. It smelled of old money-seared scallops and a faint, almost imperceptible floral note that probably had its own patent. Chandeliers like frozen waterfalls of crystal hung from the vaulted ceiling, their light catching the polished silver and the expectant faces of New York's elite. This was a place where deals were sealed with a handshake over a $5,000 bottle of Chateau Petrus, and where a person's worth was judged by the cut of their suit and the name on their reservation. Tonight, the most important reservation belonged to Gavin Creed. From the outside, Gavin was the city's golden son. At 36, he was the founder and CEO of Creed Capital, a private equity firm so aggressive and successful it was spoken of in the same breath as Wall Street legends. He had a jawline that looked like it was carved from granite eyes, the color of a stormy sea, and a reputation for being utterly ruthless. He hadn't just climbed the ladder of success. He had built his own, kicked the rungs out from under his competitors, and then set the old ladder on fire. But tonight, the golden sun was tarnished with a thick coat of stress. Seated across from him were two men from Nakamura Corp, the Tokyo-based tech giant, Mr. Saito and Mr. Kenji. This deal, the acquisition of a revolutionary AI logistics company, was the crown jewel of Gavin's career. It would elevate him from a mere billionaire to a kingmaker, a true titan. But it was stalling. The Japanese executives were cautious, their questions precise, their faces unreadable. Every smile felt like a polite refusal. Beside Gavin, his junior executive, Gideon, fidgeted with his tie, his face pale with anxiety. Gavin's lawyer, a stoic man named Mr. Davies, simply watched his expression, a careful mask of neutrality. Gavin could feel the deal slipping through his fingers like fine sand, and the pressure was building in his chest, a physical weight that made the starched collar of his shirt feel like a noose. He signaled for another bottle of wine, his gesture sharp and impatient. It was Rosa Miller who saw the signal. Rosa had worked at Ethelgard for 6 months. To her, the restaurant wasn't a symbol of success. It was a theater of survival. Each shift was a tightrope walk of balancing heavy trays, remembering complex orders, and maintaining a state of perpetual smiling invisibility. She was an expert at becoming part of the background, a silent phantom who refilled water glasses and cleared plates without ever drawing a glance. She was 28, though the long hours and constant worry about rent for her tiny Brooklyn apartment had etched faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes. She had come to New York with dreams of being a graphic designer, but the city had a way of grinding dreams into dust, forcing you to take whatever job paid the bills. Her life was a world away from the one Gavin Creed inhabited. She knew this because she, like everyone else in the financial world, knew who he was. His face was plastered on magazine covers, his success story, a modern myth. A boy from the wrong side of the tracks who remade himself into a king. Seeing him in person was surreal. He was more intense, more magnetic, and radiated a cold, dangerous energy that made the hairs on her arms stand up. She approached the table with the practiced grace of a seasoned waitress. The wine was a 2005 Domaine de la Romane Conti, a bottle so expensive she was terrified to even hold it. "Mr. Creed," she said, her voice a soft murmur as she presented the bottle. He didn't even look at her. He just grunted a sound of dismissal and gestured impatiently at the glasses. Gideon flinched. The Japanese executives remained perfectly still. Rosa's hands were steady as she began to pour. She'd performed this ritual 1,000 times. The precise angle, the gentle tilt, the small twist of the bottle to prevent a drip. She poured for Mr. Saito, then Mr. Kenji. Then she moved to Gavin, and that's when it happened. A busboy rushing past with a heavy tray of cleared dishes stumbled. His tray clipped Rosa's elbow, just a slight nudge, but it was enough. The neck of the bottle jerked. A stream of dark crimson wine, worth more than Rosa's entire monthly salary, splashed across the pristine white tablecloth, and worse, onto the sleeve of Gavin Creed's custom-tailored Tom Ford suit. The silence at the table was instantaneous and absolute. It was as if a vacuum had sucked all the sound out of their corner of the restaurant. Rosa froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Oh my God," she whispered, her face draining of all color. "I am so sorry." Gideon looked like he was about to have a heart attack on his boss's behalf. Mr. Davies closed his eyes for a brief second, as if in prayer. The Japanese executives for the first time showed a flicker of emotion, surprised discomfort. Gavin looked down at his sleeve, at the spreading stain of deep red on the immaculate grey fabric. He didn't move for a full 5 seconds. He just stared. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes, those stormy grey seas, were fixed on Rosa, and the calm had turned into a raging hurricane. "Are you an absolute idiot?" He hissed, his voice low, but carrying a venom that made Rosa physically recoil. He didn't shout. Not at first. It was worse. It was a cold, surgical evisceration. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" He continued, his voice rising slightly with each word. "This is a $10,000 suit. That was a $5,000 bottle of wine. But that's just money. What you've done is disrupt a multi-billion-dollar negotiation. You, with your incompetence and your clumsiness, have cast a pall over this entire evening." He was on his feet now. The pretense of civility was gone. The raw volcanic pressure he'd been under all night had found a target, a release valve. And it was Rosa. It was an accident. She stammered, her hands trembling. The busboy. "Do not make excuses," he boomed, and this time he was shouting. Heads turned all across the restaurant. The gentle hum of conversation faltered. Diners paused forks halfway to their mouths. "I don't care if the President of the United States tripped you. Your job is to be perfect, invisible, flawless. You are paid to not make mistakes, and you have failed in the most spectacular way possible." The restaurant manager, a sleek Frenchman named Mr. Dubois, was now rushing over his face, a mask of horrified apology. "Mr. Creed, my deepest apologies. 1,000 apologies. Please allow us to take care of everything." Gavin ignored him, his eyes still locked on Rosa. He seemed to be enjoying her terror, feeding on it. "I want her fired," he snarled at Dubois. "I want her fired. And I want her name so that I can personally ensure she never works in a service establishment in this city ever again. A person with this level of ineptitude shouldn't be allowed to serve water, let alone." He was on a roll, the words, a torrent of cruelty. Rosa felt 100 pairs of eyes on her. She felt stripped bare, humiliated, worthless. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and shameful. She wanted the floor to swallow her whole. She was just a girl trying to pay her rent, and this man, this god of money and power, was trying to break her for sport. And that's when something inside her snapped. The fear didn't vanish, but it was suddenly joined by a different feeling anger, a deep, resonant anger. Who was he? Who was this man to stand in his ivory tower and treat another human being like dirt beneath his heel? The myth of Gavin Creed. The boy from the wrong side of the tracks was a lie. He hadn't just left his past behind. He had clearly stomped on it and forgotten the feel of the mud. Her trembling stopped. She straightened her back. She lifted her chin and met his furious gaze directly. The tears were still there, but they were no longer tears of shame. They were tears of defiance. She took a slow, steadying breath. The entire restaurant was dead silent, waiting for the final crushing blow. The manager was about to drag her away. Gavin's face was contorted in a mask of triumphant rage, and then Rosa spoke. Her voice wasn't loud. It wasn't a shout or a scream. It was quiet, clear, and carried across the silent room with the force of a thunderclap. "Mr. Creed." "Gavin." She used his first name. The intimacy of it was a shock in itself. His fury faltered for a microsecond, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. She held his gaze and asked the question that would change everything. "Do you still have the other half of the king's coin?" The room remained silent, but the quality of the silence changed. It was no longer the silence of a crowd watching a spectacle. It was the silence of utter, profound bewilderment. The question meant nothing to anyone else in the room. It was a string of nonsense words. But to Gavin Creed, it was a ghost. The rage on his face didn't just disappear. It shattered. It was replaced by a look of such profound shock, such raw, unveiled disbelief, that he looked like a completely different person. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale as a spectre under the crystal lights. His jaw, which had been tight with anger, went slack. He stared at Rosa, but he wasn't seeing a clumsy waitress anymore. He was seeing something else. Someone else. A memory he had buried 20 years ago under a mountain of ambition and pain. He took a half-step back, a reflexive, instinctual movement, as if he'd been physically struck. The Titan of Wall Street, the man who could move markets with a whisper, was rendered utterly speechless by a quiet waitress and a question about a coin. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Mr. Sato and Mr. Kenji exchanged a look of pure confusion. Gideon's mouth was hanging open. Mr. Dubois looked back and forth between the billionaire and the waitress, his mind unable to compute what was happening. In that moment, Rosa Miller, the invisible waitress, was the most powerful person in the room. The world swam back into focus for Gavin Creed in slow, painful increments. The hushed whispers from the surrounding tables, the bewildered face of his lawyer, the crystal chandelier that now seemed to be mocking him with its brilliance. But all he could truly see was the woman standing before him. Rosa Miller. The name meant nothing. Her face, however, was a key, unlocking a door in his mind that he had bricked up and plastered over decades ago. The freckles were fainter. The childhood roundness of her cheeks was gone, replaced by the elegant angles of a woman who had known hardship. But the eyes, they were the same shade of determined green, like moss growing on old stone. The eyes of Chloe. His Chloe. "Get out," Gavin said, his voice a hoarse rasp. It wasn't directed at Rosa. He waved a dismissive, trembling hand at his guests. "The meeting is over. Gideon Davies, get them back to their hotel. We're done for tonight." Gideon startled into action, began sputtering apologies to the Japanese executives. Mr. Davies, ever the professional, rose smoothly. "Gentlemen, my sincerest apologies for the interruption. We will reschedule at your earliest convenience." He shot Gavin a look filled with 1,000 questions, but Gavin's gaze was still fixed on Rosa, a man seeing a phantom in broad daylight. Mr. Dubois, the manager, stepped forward again, wringing his hands. Mr. Dorsard, Creed, shall I remove her? Gavin's head snapped towards him. Touch her, and you'll be managing a hot dog stand in Queens. He snarled, the venom returning, but this time it was protective. Confused. Get us a private room. Now. Dubois scurried away without another word. The spell was broken, and the restaurant erupted into a low roar of gossip and speculation. Gavin turned back to Rosa. The anger was gone, replaced by a raw, unnerving vulnerability. He looked lost. You, he said the single word heavy with 2 decades of unasked questions. He led her not by the arm but by walking in front of her, as if she were a fragile, explosive secret he needed to contain. They were shown to the Merlot room, a small opulent space designed for intimate dinners, dominated by a single mahogany table and walls lined with wine bottles behind wrought iron gates. The door clicked shut, sealing them in a cocoon of silence and suffocating history. For a long moment they just stood there, separated by the polished table. How Gavin finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. "How are you here? I work here." Rosa replied, her voice steady now. The initial shock had passed, replaced by a strange, melancholic calm. She had gambled everything on that one sentence, and now she had to play the hand she was dealt. "I saw your picture in a magazine a while back. I read about how you frequented this place. I applied for a job. I've been hoping to see you." "Hoping to see me," he repeated, a bitter, incredulous laugh escaping his lips. "For what a handout?" To remind the great Gavin Creed of the dirt he came from. Is that it? The walls were going back up, the vulnerability being patched over with his old armor of cynical aggression. Rosa's expression didn't waver. "No. I came for an answer, Damie." The childhood nickname hit him harder than the first question. No one had called him that in 20 years. He was Gavin Creed. He was Mr. Creed. He wasn't Damie, the skinny, scrappy kid from Harrow's End, the run-down, forgotten borough that the city tried to pretend didn't exist. "Don't call me that," he said, his voice tight. "Why not?" she challenged softly. "It's who you are, or who you were. I just wanted to know what happened to that boy, the one who promised he'd never forget where he came from." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and clear, and with it, the memories flooded back, no longer a trickle but a raging torrent. Flashback, 20 years earlier. Harrow's End. The world was grey. The concrete of the crumbling apartment blocks was grey. The sky was often a smog-filled grey, and the future felt greyest of all. But for 10-year-old Damie and 8-year-old Chloe, there were pockets of colour. There was the green of the overgrown patch of weeds behind the laundromat they called the jungle. There was the bright, chaotic red of Mrs. Alvarez's chili cart on the corner. And there was the metallic gold of the king's coin. It wasn't a real coin. It was a token from a broken-down arcade machine, King's Quest. Damie had found it lodged in the coin return slot. It was thick and heavy. On one side was a stamped crown. He'd taken it home, and using his father's hammer and a nail, managed to snap it cleanly in two, a jagged line running right through the crown. He found Chloe in their usual spot, the rusty fire escape on the back of her building, overlooking a landscape of brick walls and broken glass. "I've got something," he'd said, his voice full of a boy's solemn importance. He presented her with one half of the token. "This is for you." She took the piece of metal, her small fingers tracing the sharp, broken edge. "What is it?" "It's the king's coin," he announced. "I'm the king, and you're the queen. As long as we both have our half, we're a team. We're going to get out of this place, Chloe. We're going to be rich, not just regular rich. So rich we can buy the whole block and turn it into a park with a real castle. Rosa's green eyes, wide with wonder, had lit up. A real castle with a moat. With a moat full of chocolate milk, he promised, puffing out his chest. But we have to promise. Never lose your half, and never ever forget. No matter what. I promise, she had whispered, clutching the metal piece so tightly the jagged edge dug into her palm. King's honor. That coin became their symbol. It was proof that their friendship was stronger than the poverty that surrounded them. It was a promise of a future that wasn't grey. Present day. The Merlot room. The king's coin. Gavin murmured the memory so vivid he could almost feel the phantom weight of the broken token in his pocket. He had lost it years ago, probably tossed out with a pair of old jeans when he went off to college on a scholarship, the first step in his deliberate erasure of the past. You still haven't answered me, Rosa said, pulling him back from the haze of memory. Do you still have it? No. He admitted the word, tasting like failure. I lost it. A long time ago. A flicker of disappointment crossed her face, but she nodded as if she had expected it. I still have mine. She reached into the pocket of her drab work apron and pulled out a small tarnished piece of metal. It was a half circle, the edge jagged and sharp with the bottom half of a crown stamped into it. She placed it gently on the polished mahogany table. It looked small and out of place, a relic from a forgotten civilization. Seeing it so real and solid after all this time was like a punch to the gut. It was a tangible piece of the boy he had murdered to become the man he was. Why Rosa? He asked, his voice pleading now. The fight had completely drained out of him. Why did you never try to contact me before? Why a public spectacle like this? I tried, she said, and for the first time, a note of bitterness crept into her voice. I wrote you letters when you first got your scholarship. To your university. They all came back, returned to sender. After you made your first million, I called your office. A very polite assistant told me Mr. Creed doesn't accept unsolicited calls. I was invisible to you, Gavin. The only way to get you to see me was to get right in your face. To make it impossible for you to ignore me. She leaned forward, her green eyes boring into him. I didn't come for your money. I came because I need to know why you left. Not just Harrow's End. Why you left me. One day you were there, my best friend, my king. The next you were gone. Your family packed up in the middle of the night. No goodbye. No note. Nothing. You just vanished. Do you have any idea what that does to a kid? The question hit him with the force of an accusation because he knew the answer. He knew exactly why he left, and it was a memory far darker than promises made on a fire escape. It was a memory of fear. A gut-wrenching, paralyzing fear that had been the true fuel for his ambition. He sank into one of the plush chairs, the strength gone from his legs. He ran a hand over his face, the picture of a man utterly defeated. It was because of Finn, he said the name, tasting like ash in his mouth. Rosa flinched a sudden sharp intake of breath. Finn O'Malley. The name was a bogeyman from their childhood, a local loan shark and thug who preyed on the desperate families of Harrow's End. A man with a chilling smile and dead eyes. What about him? Rosa whispered. Your dad Gavin said, his voice heavy with guilt. He owed Finn money. A lot of money. I knew about it. I used to see Finn's car parked on your street. One night I was heading to your place. I was going to climb up the fire escape. I heard shouting from the alley behind your building. He paused, swallowing hard. The memory was seared into his brain. I saw them. Finn and one of his goons. They had your father pushed up against the wall. They were hurting him, Rosa. Badly. Your dad was trying to be brave, but he was terrified. And I stood there, in the shadows. I was 10 years old, and I was so scared I couldn't breathe. I felt like if I made a sound, they'd come for me next. Tears were now silently streaming down Rosa's face. She knew her father had gotten into trouble, but she never knew the details. He had always protected her from the worst of it. Finn saw me. Gavin confessed the shameful secret finally being spoken aloud after 2 decades. I thought he did anyway. He glanced over right at the shadows where I was hiding. He didn't say anything but his eyes. It was like he was marking me. The next day my dad came home from the factory, his face white as a sheet. He told us to pack. He said Harrow's End wasn't safe for us anymore, that a man had warned him to get his son out of town or he'd end up like the Millers. We were gone by morning. He finally looked at her, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears of shame. I ran Rosa. I was a coward. I left you there to deal with monsters like Finn, and I ran. I spent the next 20 years running. I built this empire, all this power, all this money, so that I would never, ever have to feel that powerless and scared again. So that no one like Finn O'Malley could ever touch me. And forgetting you, forgetting Harrow's End, it was part of the armor. It was easier than living with the shame of what I did, or what I didn't do. The confession lay between them raw and ugly. The story of Gavin Creed wasn't one of rags to riches. It was a story of a terrified boy running from his own cowardice. Rosa wiped her tears with the back of her hand. She looked at the man across from her, not a billionaire titan, but a haunted man-child. The anger she had held on to for so long began to dissolve, replaced by a profound, aching sadness for the both of them, for the children they were and the adults that trauma had shaped them into. She took a deep breath, preparing to deliver the final devastating blow, the real reason she had sought him out. "I understand why you ran, Damie," she said softly, using the name again. "But this time, it was an act of pity, not provocation. I really do. But there's something you need to know." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper fraught with urgency. "The running isn't over. Finn O'Malley knows who you are. He knows where you are. And Gavin, he's back. If Gavin's blood had run cold before it turned to ice now, the name Finn O'Malley, spoken in the past tense, was a source of shame. Spoken in the present tense, it was a threat, a deep primal fear, the one he thought he'd buried under a fortress of wealth, snaked its way up his spine. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice tight with a mixture of disbelief and dread. He's a neighborhood thug. A ghost. How could he possibly be a part of my life?" "Now ghosts have a way of finding you," Rosa said, her expression grim. She leaned back in her chair, the story weighing heavily on her. "After you left, things got worse for my family. My dad never recovered. Not really. He was always looking over his shoulder. The debt to Finn hung over us like a shroud. We finally managed to move away a few years later, but the damage was done. My father passed away when I was 19. He had a heart attack. The doctors said it was stress. The unspoken accusation the stress Finn caused was deafening. Gavin flinched as if he'd been struck. This was the fallout from the alleyway, the collateral damage of his cowardice. Rosa continued, her voice gaining a harder edge. "I spent years being angry. At you, at Finn, at the world. But anger doesn't pay the rent. I moved to New York, tried to start over. About a year ago, I was working at a different restaurant, a mid-tier place in Midtown. And I saw him. You saw Finn. He came in for lunch, she confirmed, a shiver running through her. He looked different. Older, heavier. He was wearing an expensive suit, looked almost legitimate. He called himself Mr. O'Malley and was talking about real estate investments. But it was him. The eyes were the same. Dead. Empty. I hid in the kitchen until he left. I quit the next day. Gavin's mind was racing, trying to process the impossible convergence of his two worlds. A real estate investor. That's not possible. A man like that doesn't just go straight. He didn't, Rosa said darkly. I started digging. Just online, late at night. Old news articles from borough papers, public records. It's amazing what you can find if you look hard enough. Finn O'Malley washed himself clean. On paper, at least. He runs a company called Harrow Development Group. He buys up old, distressed properties in neighborhoods like the one we grew up in, forces the tenants out, and flips them for luxury condos. It's predatory, but it's all technically legal. He's a shark who learned to swim in corporate waters. Gavin felt a nauseating lurch in his stomach. The thuggery hadn't stopped. It had just been professionalized. Finn was still preying on the weak, but now he was doing it with lawyers and loopholes instead of fists. But that's not the worst part, Rosa said, her voice dropping lower. About 2 months ago, I saw an article about your big deal, the one with Nakamura Corp. It mentioned the target company Innovatex Solutions. What about it? Gavin asked, dreading the answer. The article mentioned Innovatex's main property holdings, the land, where they want to build their new North American headquarters. The land is being brokered by a subsidiary of a larger real estate firm. She paused, letting the weight of the moment build. That firm is the Harrow Development Group. The connection slammed into Gavin with the force of a physical blow. He stood up and began to pace the small room like a caged tiger. It couldn't be a coincidence. It was impossible. Finn O'Malley, the monster from his past, was a silent, invisible partner in the biggest deal of his life. He knows Gavin breathed the realization dawning on him. This whole time he's known he was connected to my deal. He more than knows Gavin. Rosa said, her voice filled with urgency. He's using it. That's why I had to do what I did tonight. It wasn't just about getting answers for myself anymore. She reached into her apron pocket again, but this time she didn't pull out the coin. She pulled out a cheap, folded piece of paper, a printout of an email. My friend Maya, another waitress here, her brother is an intern at a tabloid blog, the kind that digs up dirt on people like you. He owes me a favor. He intercepted this. It was an anonymous tip sent to his editor. She pushed the paper across the table. Gavin snatched it up his hands, trembling slightly as he read. To the downtown dirtbag, editor, from a concerned citizen subject. The real Gavin Creed. You all write about Gavin Creed like he's some kind of visionary, a self-made man. You should look into where he really comes from. Ask him about Harrow's End. Ask him about his family's connections to local criminal elements. Ask him what he was doing the night Patrick Miller got his legs broken. The great Gavin Creed isn't self-made. He's built on secrets and looking the other way. A man like that shouldn't be running a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, especially not one with a partner as conservative as Nakamura Corp. Keep digging, there's more there. Gavin read it twice, then a third time, the words blurring in front of his eyes. It was a poison dart, expertly crafted, vague enough to be deniable, specific enough to be terrifyingly effective. Patrick Miller's broken legs. A detail he hadn't even mentioned. Finn wasn't just connected to the deal. He was actively trying to sabotage it, to blackmail him. The scene at the dinner table suddenly made perfect horrible sense. The stalling from Saito and Kenji. Their polite but persistent questions about his background, his family history, the kind of deep-dive due diligence that was unusual even for a deal this size. Nakamura Corp had likely received a similar, anonymous tip. They were sniffing around the edges of his past, and they were smelling smoke. "He's blackmailing me," Gavin whispered the reality of his situation, crashing down on him. "He's not after a payout. Not yet. He's squeezing me. He's letting me know he has this information, this power over me. He'll let the deal go through, and then once I'm in deeper than ever, that's when he'll come for his price. A piece of the company. A permanent silent partnership. He's trying to latch onto me like a parasite." He finally understood. Finn's ultimate revenge wasn't to expose him. It was to become him. To use Gavin's success as his own, to tether their fates together forever, the thug and the boy who ran away. He slumped back into the chair, utterly defeated. All his money, all his power, his army of lawyers, and his impenetrable reputation, all of it was useless against a ghost from a grimy alleyway. If news of this got out, true or not, the conservative board of Nakamura would run for the hills. The scandal would shatter Creed Capital. He would lose everything. Finn had him cornered 20 years later. He looked at Rosa. She was watching him, her expression a mixture of pity and resolve. She had risked her job, faced his wrath, and endured public humiliation to bring him this warning. She had done the thing he had failed to do. All those years ago, she had stood up to the monster. In that moment, the power dynamic in the room, which had been shifting all night, settled into its final form. Gavin Creed, the billionaire, was helpless. Rosa Miller, the waitress, held the key. She didn't have money or influence, but she had the one thing he didn't, the truth. She was the only other person alive who knew the whole story, who understood the battlefield. "What do I do?" he asked, the question stripped of all arrogance. It was the plea of a terrified man. Rosa looked at the half-coin still sitting on the table, then back at him. A strange, fierce light ignited in her green eyes. The fear was gone. The sadness was gone. All that was left was a steely resolve that Gavin recognized from his own reflection in the mirror during his most ruthless negotiations. First, she said, her voice ringing with newfound authority, "You stop running." She reached across the table and pushed the tarnished piece of metal towards him. "You've spent 20 years trying to forget the boy from Harrow's End. Right now, he's the only one who can save you. We need to stop thinking like a billionaire and a waitress. It's time to start thinking like the king and queen of the jungle again. We are not going to let him win. We are going to fight back." For the first time that night, a flicker of something other than fear or shame sparked in Gavin's chest. It was a ghost of a different kind, the ghost of the boy who once promised his best friend they would conquer the world. He looked at Rosa, really looked at her, and saw not a victim or a waitress, but an ally, a partner. He slowly reached out and picked up the half-coin. Its jagged edge felt sharp and real against his palm. "Okay, Chloe," he said, his voice finally steady. "What's the plan?" The Merlot room at Ethelgard transformed from a chamber of confession into a war room. The opulence of the surroundings, the vintage wines, the polished mahogany was a stark, ironic backdrop to the gritty strategy they were formulating. The roles were now irrevocably reversed. Gavin, the master of the corporate universe, was now the student listening intently. Rosa, who hours ago was serving him wine, was now the strategist drawing on a lifetime of observing the world from the ground up. "We can't fight him on his new turf." Rosa began, her voice low and intense. In the world of contracts and boardrooms, he's already won. He's laid a trap, and your every move will just get you more entangled. Your lawyers, your PR people, they can't help you. They're playing chess. Finn is playing a different game. He's a street fighter wearing a suit. So what do we do? Gavin asked, pacing again. But this time, his energy was focused, not frantic. If I try to expose him as a thug, it just confirms I have ties to that world. Nakamura dumps me. If I do nothing, he strangles me slowly. It's a perfect trap. No. Rosa counted, her eyes sharp. It's not perfect. His strength is also his weakness. He's pretending to be something he's not. He's a predator who has put on a sheep's fleece. We don't attack the predator. We pull off the fleece in front of everyone. She leaned forward. You can't be the one to do it. It has to come from someone else. Someone he's hurting now. His new business model. This Harrow Development Group. You said it yourself, it's predatory. He's forcing people out of their homes. I guarantee you there are dozens of families, modern-day versions of my own dad, that he is terrorizing right now. Those are the people we need. A light went on in Gavin's mind. He stopped pacing. My foundation, the Creed Foundation. We do pro bono legal work, urban development grants. Exactly, Rosa affirmed. You don't go after Finn O'Malley, the ghost from your past. You, Gavin Creed, the philanthropist, launch a major initiative to combat predatory real estate practices in New York's underserved boroughs. You offer free legal representation to anyone being strong-armed by developers. You become the champion of the very people he's preying on. Gavin saw the brilliance of it immediately. It was a flanking maneuver. He wouldn't be attacking Finn directly, but he would be systematically dismantling his business from the ground up, all under the unimpeachable guise of charity. My team can get it set up in days, Gavin said, a spark of his old decisive self returning. He pulled out his phone. I have the best investigators money can buy. We'll find every family Finn has threatened, every illegal eviction notice, every ounce of leverage he's used. We'll bury him in lawsuits. And I'll find the lead witness, Rosa said. I still know people in the old neighborhood, people who talk. I can find the one person, the one family with the most compelling story, the one Finn has underestimated. He won't see it coming from me. Their eyes met across the table. A new partnership was forged in the fire of the old one. The next 72 hours were a blur of controlled chaos. Gavin was a force of nature unleashed. He mobilized his foundation, redirecting millions in funding. His legal team, led by the now fully briefed and deeply impressed Mr. Davies, worked around the clock setting up a public-facing task force. His private investigators, a team of ex-FBI and Mossad agents, descended on Harrow Development Group's public records like wolves. Rosa, meanwhile, went back to the one place Gavin could never go, Harrow's End. It was still grey, but now the grey was punctuated by the garish signs of gentrification. Luxury living banners hung from buildings that used to house families she knew. She reconnected with old acquaintances, speaking to them not as a waitress from a fancy restaurant, but as one of their own. As Patrick Miller's daughter. She found her target in a third-floor walk-up, in a building slated for demolition. An elderly woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, who had lived there for 50 years. Finn's company had bought the building and was using every dirty trick in the book to force her out, cutting off the heat, intermittently refusing repairs, sending threatening legal notices filled with confusing jargon. But Mrs. Rodriguez was a fighter, and she had proof. She had kept a detailed log of every incident, every threat. She even had a recording on her old flip phone of one of Finn's men, telling her it would be a shame if there was a fire. It was the smoking gun. Gavin arranged the meeting, not in his gleaming office, but in a neutral rented conference room. On one side of the table sat Finn O'Malley, flanked by 2 expensive lawyers. He walked in with an air of smug confidence, clearly believing this was the meeting where Gavin Creed would capitulate and offer him a fortune to stay quiet. On the other side sat Gavin with Mr. Davies, and next to Gavin sat Rosa Miller. Finn's eyes widened almost imperceptibly when he saw her. The smugness on his face flickered, replaced by a momentary confusion, like a predator seeing 2 different prey animals suddenly working together. Creed Finn began his voice, a gravelly purr. "Glad we could finally meet face to face. I think you'll find that we have a lot of mutual interests to discuss." "I don't think so." Finn Gavin said, his voice calm and cold. "There will be no discussion. There will be no deal. There will be no blackmail." Finn laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Brave words, but I have a story the world would love to hear. A story Nakamura Corp would find particularly fascinating. About a boy who ran away while his friend's family was being destroyed. And I have a story too," Gavin countered. "It's about a new philanthropic initiative my foundation is launching. We're calling it the Tenants' Shield Program. We're providing elite pro bono legal defense to residents in developing boroughs who are being harassed by predatory real estate firms. In fact, our first client is a lovely woman named Mrs. Rodriguez. Perhaps you've heard of her." The colour drained from Finn's face. He looked at his lawyers, who suddenly looked very nervous. "And it's funny," Gavin continued, leaning forward. "My investigators, who are very, very good at their jobs, have been looking into the Harrow Development Group. They've found a fascinating pattern of fire code violations, tax irregularities, and campaign donations to city inspectors that look highly questionable. In fact, I believe the district attorney's office will also find it fascinating." Finn was speechless. He was being outmaneuvered at every turn. "But that's all business," Rosa said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a knife. "I'm here for something more personal, Finn." She looked him straight in the eye, her gaze unflinching. "I remember you. I remember what you did to my father. Mrs. Rodriguez remembers what you're doing to her. You build your life on the fear of good people. But you made a mistake. You thought we were all still scared. You thought she nodded at Gavin, was still that scared little boy. You were wrong." Finn's composure finally cracked. "You think you can stop me? You're nobody. You're a waitress." He spat his true ugly nature, breaking through the expensive veneer. "She's not nobody," Gavin said, his voice ringing with conviction. "She's the executive director of the Tenants' Shield Program, and her first act will be to hold a press conference tomorrow morning with Mrs. Rodriguez and 20 other families you've tried to victimize, announcing a class action lawsuit against you and the Harrow Development Group." He stood up, the meeting clearly over. "My deal with Nakamura will be just fine. I called Mr. Sato this morning and told him everything, the whole story. About Harrow's end, about my cowardice, and about you. I told him how my past had come back, and how I was choosing to face it, not by paying hush money, but by using my resources to protect people from predators like you." "You're bluffing," Finn snarled, though his eyes betrayed his panic. "Am I?" Gavin replied with a cold smile. Mr. Saito was impressed. He said a man who has the courage to right the wrongs of his past is a man he can trust. "The deal is closing next week. Your leverage is gone. Your company is about to be buried in litigation. You have nothing." He looked at Finn O'Malley, the bogeyman from his childhood, and for the first time he felt no fear. He just felt pity. Finn was still the same small, pathetic man, preying on the weak in a desperate attempt to feel powerful. "It's over, Finn," Gavin said. He turned to Rosa. "Let's go. We have a press conference to prepare for." They walked out of the room, leaving Finn O'Malley sitting at the table, a ruined man, his empire of fear crumbling around him. A few days later, Gavin stood in his penthouse office overlooking Central Park. The Nakamura deal had been signed. The story of the tenants' shield program was on the front page of the New York Times. Finn O'Malley was under investigation. Rosa came and stood beside him, looking out at the city. "Quite a view," she said softly. It is, Gavin agreed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his half of the king's coin. It was clean, now polished to a dull shine. "I was wrong about what this meant." Rosa pulled out her half. "What do you mean I thought it was about escaping?" he said, "about getting rich and powerful enough to leave the past behind. But it's not. It's about remembering. It's about being strong enough not to run, but to turn around and fight for the people you left behind." He held out his half. She held out hers. For a moment, the two jagged pieces of metal hung in the air between them, not quite touching two halves of a single story. A story of a scared boy, a forgotten friend, and the long, hard road back to becoming a king worthy of his crown. They didn't need to join the coin. They were already whole. And so a moment of public humiliation became a catalyst for profound redemption. Gavin Creed learned that true power isn't measured in billions of dollars or skyscraper views, but in the courage to face your own ghosts and the integrity to right your wrongs. Rosa Miller, the waitress who was supposed to be invisible, found her voice and proved that one person armed with the truth can be more powerful than any tycoon. Their story isn't just about a billionaire and a waitress. It's a reminder that our past never truly leaves us, but it doesn't have to define us. It can be the source of our greatest strength. We all have a Harrow's End in our history, a moment we're not proud of. The question is, what do we do when it comes back to haunt us? If this story of courage, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds of friendship moved you, please give this video a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that matter. And we want to hear from you. What would you have done in Rosa's place? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching.